It began like a scene from the kind of movie that creates its own legend. In 2009, a young Miley Cyrus was already a global name. She had spent her teenage years growing up under the bright glare of the Disney Channel, fronting the phenomenon Hannah Montana. By the time she turned 17, she was ready to prove she was more than the cheerful pop star the world had known. That year, she was cast in The Last Song, a romantic drama based on a Nicholas Sparks novel. Across from her, playing her love interest, was an Australian actor few American viewers yet recognized, Liam Hemsworth. He was tall, quiet, and almost reserved, the opposite of Miley's quick energy. On screen, the chemistry between them was instant, and as filming continued on the Georgia coast, the same spark followed them off camera. Crew members later recalled how natural they seemed together. Between takes, they laughed easily, sometimes disappearing to walk along the beach after long shooting days. When filming wrapped, the movie's fictional romance had turned real. Paparazzi caught the first glimpses of them holding hands, and soon fans began calling them one of Hollywood's newest young couples. The attention was immediate and intense. Miley was already used to it, but for Liam, who had grown up in Australia with his brothers Luke and Chris, the constant presence of cameras was a shock. Still, he handled it quietly, preferring not to comment, while Miley spoke about how happy she felt. Through 2010 and 2011, their relationship moved between calm and chaos. They were both young and in careers moving at different speeds. Miley was releasing new music and trying to step away from her Disney image, while Liam was beginning to get roles that could turn him into a household name. When he joined the cast of The Hunger Games, his life changed overnight. The movie's success made him internationally famous. Suddenly, both of them were growing fast, but sometimes in different directions. Publicly, the pair appeared affectionate. They were photographed at red carpets and award shows, whispering to each other or sharing quick smiles. But the press also noticed the breaks between their appearances. Reports of short separations began to surface. Miley admitted in interviews that they were learning who they were as individuals. For her, it was a period of reinvention. She was writing songs that expressed a bolder personality, and she wanted freedom to experiment. Liam, described by friends as more private, seemed to prefer quiet time away from the spotlight. In 2012, despite the ups and downs, they became engaged. Liam proposed with a 3.5-carat diamond ring, and Miley said yes. The announcement came as a surprise to many. She was only 19. He was 22. Fans filled social media with congratulations, and entertainment outlets predicted they would be the next Hollywood power couple. For a while, they looked exactly that. Miley posted photos of the ring and spoke about planning a simple, intimate wedding. She said she felt the relationship was strong because it had grown through real experiences, not just fame. But behind the beautiful headlines, both were facing personal changes. Miley was in the middle of redefining her image. She cut her hair short, began exploring new musical directions, and publicly declared she wanted to express her individuality without limits. That transformation made headlines on its own. Some critics misread her reinvention as rebellion, while others praised her for breaking stereotypes. Through it all, Liam remained mostly silent in the media, which only fed speculation about how he felt watching the shift. By 2013, the engagement began to show cracks. They were still photographed together occasionally, but gossip sites started questioning whether they were still a couple. Miley released Wrecking Ball, a song whose emotional lyrics and powerful video made people wonder if it reflected her personal life. She didn't directly confirm it, but fans connected the dots. Around that same period, Liam was often seen spending time in Los Angeles while Miley traveled for performances. Eventually, in September 2013, a representative for Miley confirmed that the engagement was off. After 4 years of an on-again, off-again relationship, the two had officially parted ways. For many celebrities, that might have been the end of the story. But Miley and Liam were not an ordinary Hollywood pair. Their connection, formed when they were teenagers, still seemed to pull them back together. Even after the breakup, neither spoke negatively about the other. Miley said in an interview that she would always love him, and that the relationship had taught her a lot about herself. Liam, as usual, kept things private, though his friends told reporters he wished her well. The following years were a time of separate growth. Miley focused on her career, experimenting with different musical styles and causes that mattered to her. She went through what she later called a process of self-discovery. Liam, meanwhile, continued acting, balancing major franchise projects with smaller films. He returned off into Australia to spend time with family, away from the glare of Hollywood. The distance seemed to help both of them mature. In 2015, fate quietly began to bring them back into each other's orbits. They were seen together again at events and family gatherings. At first, fans doubted anything serious was happening, but soon there were photos of Miley wearing what looked like her old engagement ring. When asked in interviews, she neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, smiling instead and saying she felt very happy. The idea that they might be giving love another chance fascinated the media. People magazine and other outlets ran cover stories suggesting reconciliation. By early 2016, it was clear that they were indeed back together. Friends said the time apart had changed them. Miley was calmer, more centered. Liam seemed comfortable again being around publicity, but on his own terms. They adopted rescue dogs, spent time at their Malibu home, and appeared genuinely content. When asked about marriage, they both downplayed the idea, saying they were focused on enjoying the relationship without pressure. Then came the Malibu fires of 2018, which destroyed their home. In the aftermath, they appeared united, supporting each other while helping displaced animals and neighbors. The tragedy seemed to reinforce their bond. A few months later, in December 2018, the couple quietly married in a small ceremony in Tennessee surrounded by close family. Photos from the day showed them barefoot, smiling and visibly emotional. After nearly a decade of history, meeting as teenagers, falling in love, separating, and finding their way back, the wedding felt like the natural, hopeful conclusion to a long journey. But even as fans celebrated their happy ending, subtle signs hinted that life after marriage would not be simple. Both of them had changed significantly since the early Last Song days. They had grown up under intense public attention, experienced different versions of themselves, and built careers that often kept them apart. Miley continued to speak openly about personal freedom and the importance of self-expression. Liam preferred privacy and stability. Those differences, once complementary, began to create quiet distance. For the moment, though, in the first months of their marriage, they appeared peaceful and content. Miley spoke warmly about her husband in interviews, calling him her best friend. Liam promoted his films and avoided discussing his personal life, but his affection for her was clear in photos where they laughed together. From the outside, it looked like the story had come full circle. The young stars who met on a film set had overcome years of ups and downs to find their way back to each other. What no one outside their circle could see was that new challenges were already forming, subtle but powerful enough to test the bond they had rebuilt. Fame, creativity, and personal evolution would soon collide once again, and the world would watch as their story took another unexpected turn. The wedding of Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth was meant to be the peaceful ending to a stormy story. For fans who had followed their long, unpredictable relationship, seeing them finally marry felt like closure. The images that appeared online were simple and heartfelt. Miley in an off-shoulder ivory dress, Liam in a suit, both smiling as they held each other close in a modest Tennessee home. There were no red carpets, no media invitations, just family, a few close friends, and genuine emotion. Miley later described it as perfect because it was quiet, sincere, and far from Hollywood's noise. In the months that followed, the newlyweds appeared deeply in sync. Miley often referred to Liam as her partner and her grounding force. On social media, she called him her survival partner, referencing how they had rebuilt their lives after losing their Malibu home to the California wildfires. For her, he symbolized safety and loyalty, a presence she could return to no matter how chaotic the world around her became. Liam, on his side, rarely spoke publicly about their marriage but showed his happiness in the way he smiled beside her at events. It was the picture of calm after a decade of turbulence. Yet beneath that calm surface, small differences in lifestyle and personality began to resurface. Miley had always been expressive, open, and artistically restless. She thrived on creativity that sometimes pushed boundaries, using her art to explore identity, freedom, and emotion. Liam was more private, reserved, and protective of his personal space. While those traits had once balanced each other, marriage placed them in constant proximity. Miley once mentioned that she didn't fit the traditional image of a wife, and that her ideas about relationships and love were fluid. She spoke candidly about how love for her wasn't confined to convention. It was about connection, truth, and authenticity. By early 2019, they were leading slightly different rhythms. Miley had returned to music, preparing new material and experimenting with sounds that reflected her growth. She gave interviews about how the past few years had shaped her, and how she wanted her art to be a mirror of real life. Liam was filming new projects and often spent time in Australia with family when his schedule allowed. They were married but frequently apart because of their careers. For two people who had already spent years navigating distance, it was familiar territory. But now there was more at stake. Then came the summer of 2019. Miley released her extended play She Is Coming, which signaled a new musical era, edgy, raw, and full of emotional honesty. Listeners noticed the lyrics often referenced independence, inner conflict, and transformation. Around the same time, her interviews became more introspective. She talked about personal change, saying she was discovering parts of herself that she hadn't understood before. She emphasized that marriage didn't mean losing individuality, and that she still felt a need to explore who she was as a person. Those comments sparked media speculation. Reporters began asking whether her words hinted at trouble in paradise, though she didn't directly address it. In August 2019, photographs surfaced of Miley vacationing in Italy. She appeared relaxed, enjoying time with friends after promoting her music. But soon, images showing her sharing a kiss with another person caught global attention. The internet exploded with interpretations, and almost immediately, representatives for Miley confirmed that she and Liam had separated. It was one of the most discussed celebrity breakups of that year. The statement emphasized that they had decided to part ways to focus on themselves and their personal growth. The public reaction was intense. Fans who had rooted for the couple through a decade of breakups and reunions were shocked. Social media filled with speculation, commentary, and sadness. Some blamed fame, others blamed incompatibility. For Miley and Liam, it must have been overwhelming to see their private emotions dissected by millions. Within days, both were trending globally. Liam, who was in Australia at the time, released a short message on Instagram confirming the separation and wishing Miley health and happiness. It was calm, respectful, and entirely in line with his character. He said simply that he didn't wish to discuss the matter any further. Miley, meanwhile, responded through her art and public appearances. She posted a message on social media explaining that people change as they grow, and sometimes relationships can't survive that evolution. She said she had nothing to hide and that the relationship had been real and full of love, but she was in a new chapter. In later interviews, she expressed frustration that some media outlets portrayed her as reckless or impulsive. She said that wasn't the truth, that she had worked hard to maintain the relationship and that walking away was a decision made from self-awareness, not rebellion. As the months passed, both handled the breakup with dignity, though in different ways. Liam returned to Australia, surrounded by his family, and began to focus on work and recovery. Miley dove into her music. Her 2020 album Plastic Hearts reflected that phase of her life, a mix of reflection, empowerment, and resilience. In songs and interviews, she described the emotional complexity of ending something that had lasted a decade. She admitted that while she still loved Liam deeply, their paths had diverged. Their breakup wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of years of personal growth happening on separate timelines. Miley had evolved into a bold, expressive artist unafraid of controversy, while Liam remained grounded, preferring calm over chaos. Both admired those traits in each other, but over time the balance became difficult to maintain. When one partner thrives on change and the other seeks stability, even love can become complicated. Still, despite the heartbreak, neither ever spoke ill of the other. In a world where celebrity separations often spiral into public feuds, theirs remained remarkably respectful. Miley continued to acknowledge the love they shared, saying in one interview that she would always remember him as the person who knew her best. Liam stayed silent, his quietness speaking volumes about his wish for peace rather than publicity. In many ways, their story after marriage symbolized the realities of growing up under the world's gaze. They had fallen in love as teenagers and spent the next 10 years trying to understand who they were, both as individuals and as a couple. The pressure of fame, the constant exposure, and the expectations of millions made that journey harder. They were no longer the same people who met on a film set in 2009. They had changed, And sometimes change, though painful, is necessary. When news of their official divorce surfaced in early 2020, it wasn't met with the shock that followed their separation months earlier. By then, most fans understood it as closure to a chapter that had already ended. Miley described it not as a failure but as the completion of something beautiful. Liam quietly moved forward, focusing on work and his private life away from the spotlight. Both seemed determined to rebuild, not from bitterness but from experience. Looking back, their relationship wasn't a tragedy. It was a reflection of two people who shared love across changing seasons of life. From the innocent days of the last song to the emotional years that followed, they gave the world a story that felt genuine, imperfect, and deeply human. Their connection, even in its ending, reminded audiences that love isn't always about forever. Sometimes it's about growth, learning, and gratitude for what once was. As 2019 closed, both stood on new ground. Miley's music embraced self-discovery and independence. Liam's projects took him into a quieter, more grounded phase of life. Though they walked separate paths, the echoes of their time together lingered in every song, every film, and every memory fans carried with them. The world had watched them fall in love, break apart, reunite, and finally move on, each chapter adding another layer to one of Hollywood's most unforgettable modern love stories. After the breakup, both Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth stepped into a new reality that neither had faced before. For the first time in nearly a decade, they were not part of each other's daily lives. The connection that had defined so much of their youth was suddenly replaced with silence. Both of them had to learn how to exist without the familiar comfort of one another. And in the glare of Hollywood's constant attention, that wasn't easy. The world watched closely, waiting to see how they would move on. For Liam, the days following the public announcement were quiet. He returned to his home country of Australia, spending time with his family, surfing, and avoiding public events. His brother Chris Hemsworth became a shield for him, often speaking gently about Liam's strength and resilience when journalists tried to ask questions. Friends close to the actor said he needed space to heal, far from the noise of Los Angeles. The ocean became his therapy. His family's home on the Byron Bay coast gave him the privacy and grounding he needed to reflect. In that silence, he found the strength to move forward. Miley, on the other hand, faced the breakup through the lens of music and expression. For someone who had spent her entire life in the public eye, creativity was her escape. Only weeks after the separation, she channeled her emotions into performances and songwriting. She spoke honestly in interviews about the pain of letting go and the freedom of rediscovering herself. For her, music was not just art, it was healing. Every lyric, every melody, became a part of her rebuilding process. As 2019 moved into 2020, Miley's artistic direction took a sharp and powerful turn. She released new music that carried the tone of independence and maturity. Songs like Slide Away were instantly linked to her breakup, though she described them as reflections on growing apart rather than attacks or regrets. The lyrics painted a clear picture. A young couple once bound by love and passion, now standing on different shores, moving toward different lives. It was emotional and raw, but never cruel. Miley had found a way to tell her truth without bitterness. At the same time, Liam began re-entering the public eye in his own quiet way. He took on new film roles, including darker and more serious projects that showed his depth as an actor, beyond the Hunger Games fame. His performances were steady and understated, much like his personality. Audiences noticed his calm demeanor, a man who had faced heartbreak but didn't let it define him. The media tried to connect him to new relationships, but he rarely commented, preferring to keep his personal life guarded. Both of them, though on opposite sides of the world, were doing something similar, rebuilding their identities outside of Miley and Liam. For nearly 10 years, their names had been said together as if they were one story. Now each had to reclaim their individuality. For Miley, that meant stepping fully into the artist she had been growing into for years. Experimental, fearless, unapologetic. For Liam, it meant reconnecting with his roots, valuing quiet strength and the comfort of normalcy away from celebrity chaos. The public's reaction to their individual transformations was mixed. Some fans missed seeing them together, still holding on to the nostalgia of their on-screen romance in the last song. Others admired how both had evolved gracefully. What stood out was the respect that remained between them. There were no public fights, no harsh words, no scandals tied to their names. In an era where celebrity breakups often turned messy, Miley and Liam's story remained grounded in maturity. They had simply grown apart, something deeply human even if it played out on the world stage. Miley began openly discussing personal growth and self-love. In interviews, she said she no longer believed in fitting into labels, not for relationships, identity, or success. She wanted to live truthfully, and that honesty became the heart of her art. Her performances were more emotional, her lyrics more introspective. She wasn't afraid to show vulnerability. She said that healing didn't mean pretending to be fine. It meant accepting that pain was part of transformation. Meanwhile, Liam kept moving forward quietly. He was spotted at charity events, spending time outdoors and working steadily. Friends described him as humble and focused, grateful for his career and family support. He didn't need to broadcast his feelings to the world. His actions spoke for him. With time, the sadness faded, replaced by acceptance. Both of them seemed to understand that what they had shared wasn't meant to last forever, but it had still shaped them in meaningful ways. By 2021, Miley's music career had reached a new creative peak. Her album Plastic Hearts symbolized reinvention, an album that blended rock, pop, and raw emotion. Critics praised it as one of her most authentic works, noting how she had transformed personal pain into artistic strength. She performed live with a newfound confidence that came from surviving heartbreak and embracing independence. During interviews promoting the album, when asked about Liam, she spoke respectfully, saying that their story was real, but people change, and that's okay. It was a message of closure and grace. Liam, during the same period, appeared to have found peace as well. He continued working in film and enjoyed a low-profile lifestyle. He often avoided questions about the past, choosing to focus on the present. When fans commented that they missed seeing him and Miley together, he never reacted negatively. He had moved on quietly and gracefully, just as he had lived most of his life. His privacy became his form of strength. What made their post-breakup years so compelling was the lack of drama. For a couple who had lived under the flash of cameras for so long, both seemed determined to handle their separation with dignity. There were no public feuds, no interviews filled with resentment, only a mutual silence that spoke volumes. It was as if both understood that their story had served its purpose. It had given them love, lessons, and memories, and now it was time to let it rest. Fans often romanticize the idea that they might one day find their way back to each other. After all, they had already done it once. But this time felt different. Both had changed too much, grown too far apart. Miley was exploring her identity and her art without limits. Liam had built a life grounded in peace and simplicity. The love was still there, not as a relationship, but as mutual respect for what once was. Sometimes love doesn't need to return to prove it was real. The world gradually stopped framing them as a single story and began to see them as two individuals thriving in their own worlds. Miley became a voice for reinvention and honesty in the music industry. Liam became a symbol of quiet strength and maturity in Hollywood. Their paths no longer crossed, but their legacy as a couple remained, reminding fans of how even under the weight of fame, two people could still part ways with kindness. In many ways, the end of their relationship marked the beginning of their truest selves. They had spent a decade growing up under constant attention, trying to understand who they were both together and apart. When they finally chose themselves, it wasn't a failure. It was evolution. Miley's words in one of her interviews summed it up best. "You can still love someone and let them go." That line captured the essence of everything their story had been: passionate, complicated, beautiful, and human. As time passed, the world moved on, but their story stayed in people's hearts. Not as a tale of scandal or regret, but as a reminder that sometimes two people can share something special and still not end up together, and that's okay. Life goes on. Love changes form. Growth continues. For Miley and Liam, the chapter that began on a movie set in 2009 ended not in bitterness, but in acceptance, maturity, and gratitude for a love that helped shape who they both became. As time moved forward, the world began to see Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth not just as the couple who had broken up, but as two individuals defining themselves in completely new ways. Their names were no longer tied together by headlines or paparazzi photos. Instead, Each was carving a separate space that reflected who they had truly become. The pain that had once followed them quietly turned into purpose. For Miley, the years after her divorce were a canvas for reinvention. Every interview, every song, every performance felt like another chapter of a deeper story. One about strength, freedom, and finding balance between chaos and calm. Her music evolved once again, but this time there was a sense of maturity in her tone. Gone was the wild unpredictability of her early 20s. In its place was an artist who had been through the storm and learned how to channel it into art. Her vocals carried weight. Her lyrics told stories, and her confidence seemed to come from knowing exactly who she was. She began to speak more openly about mental health, healing, and the complexity of love. Miley explained that growing up in the public eye meant her mistakes and lessons were always magnified, but she didn't regret them. They were part of her becoming. She often mentioned that loving someone deeply, even if it doesn't last, teaches you more about yourself than any other experience. It was clear that she viewed her relationship with Liam as one of those experiences, something meaningful, not something broken. Liam, on the other hand, continued to embrace the quiet life that had always suited him. Australia became his anchor again, a place where he could walk on the beach without cameras waiting. He focused on film projects that reflected his artistic depth rather than blockbuster fame. His choices in roles became more deliberate, smaller, character-driven stories that allowed him to grow as an actor. He seemed to prefer working steadily rather than chasing the spotlight, and audiences respected that. Unlike Miley, Liam rarely spoke publicly about the past. His silence wasn't cold. It was protective. He had always valued privacy, and now more than ever he was determined to live life on his own terms. When asked in rare interviews about his outlook on love or relationships, he would smile gently and say that he believed in happiness, peace, and honesty. Nothing more, nothing less. It was the kind of wisdom that comes from experience. What was interesting to watch was how both of them, despite choosing very different lifestyles, seemed to reflect the same emotional maturity. Miley used expression to process her past. Liam used peace. Both were seeking balance, one through creation, the other through reflection. Their approaches were different, but their goals were the same: to live authentically. The media, of course, never completely stopped talking about them. Even years after their breakup, headlines occasionally resurfaced whenever one of them mentioned love, or when Miley released a song that fans thought referenced her past. Every lyric, every quote, every subtle moment was analyzed for hidden meaning. But by then, neither of them seemed affected by it. They had both reached a stage where they no longer needed to explain themselves. The narrative was out of their hands, and that was fine. For fans, watching Miley's transformation was inspiring. Her 2023 single Flowers became a global hit, not just for its catchy melody, but for the message it carried, one of self-love, independence, and closure. Many interpreted it as a reflection on her past relationship, but Miley clarified that it was more about empowerment. She wanted to show that love for oneself was as powerful as love for another person. Still, the world couldn't help but draw parallels to her history with Liam. The music video, featuring Miley in the house that fans speculated symbolized their old life together, became a cultural moment. Whether intentional or not, it felt like the final emotional chapter of their story. Not bitter, not nostalgic, but peaceful. Liam, meanwhile, had stepped into a calmer rhythm of life. He continued acting, often away from the Hollywood spotlight, and maintained strong ties with his family. His relationship with his brothers remained a cornerstone of his support system, and their lighthearted social media posts showed that, despite everything, Liam was doing just fine. The public admired his dignity. He never used his heartbreak for publicity, never fueled rumors, never sought sympathy. Instead, he let time do its work. Slowly, the world began to see him not as the ex of a global superstar, but as a grounded, talented actor in his own right. Their post-breakup trajectories became a kind of parallel growth story. Miley was the fire, bold, expressive, always transforming. Liam was the calm, steady, thoughtful, and deeply private. Together, they had created a dynamic that once captivated millions. Apart, they became the best versions of themselves. That balance, in hindsight, was perhaps what made their relationship so unforgettable. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Over time, the conversation shifted from why did they break up to what did they learn. Miley often spoke about learning, to love without attachment, and that people can come into your life to teach you lessons rather than to stay forever. Liam, through his actions, showed that healing doesn't always need to be loud. Both of them had found peace, just in different ways. Even though the world had moved on, their love story continued to exist in the collective memory of pop culture. Clips from the last song still circulate online, reminding people of where it all began. Two young actors falling in love both on screen and off. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale, but it was authentic. Fans still comment on those clips, writing messages like, "I still believe they loved each other deeply," or "They grew apart, but their story was beautiful." Their journey became more than gossip. It became a study of how love evolves under fame, pressure, and time. Both Miley and Liam had entered the industry as teenagers and lived some of their most personal moments in public. Yet they emerged not broken but wiser. That's what made their story resonate. It wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about transformation. By the mid-2020s, both had clearly established who they were as individuals. Miley had become a symbol of empowerment, authenticity, and reinvention in pop culture. Her performances reflected emotional freedom, unfiltered and real. Liam had become a figure of grace and resilience, admired for how he handled fame with quiet dignity. Their choices showed that moving on doesn't mean erasing the past. It means growing from it. In the end, what remained between them wasn't bitterness, but respect. Whenever Miley was asked about Liam, her answers were kind. Whenever Liam's name appeared alongside hers, the tone was always polite. There was no need for drama. The story had already been told. They had lived through it, learned from it, and moved beyond it. What they left behind was not just a memory of love lost, but a reminder that even relationships that don't last forever can still have meaning that endures. Their connection, born on a movie set more than a decade ago, had shaped them both in ways that would stay with them forever. And though their paths no longer crossed, their story remained one of the rare few in celebrity culture that ended not with scandal, but with grace. As the world continues to evolve, so do the people who once lived under its brightest lights. Miley and Liam's journey, from young love to personal freedom, stands as proof that even in a world built on headlines and speculation, authenticity can survive. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are the quiet ones. In the years that followed their separation, Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth quietly became symbols of something few celebrity stories managed to capture: the idea that love can be real, transformative, and still not last forever. Their journey had begun as a teenage romance on a movie set, played out across continents, careers, and chaos, and ended with two people who had learned how to let go with grace. By the time the world stopped asking questions about what went wrong, both of them had already found the answers, not in each other, but in themselves. For Miley, the years after the breakup turned into a deep exploration of independence. She had always been an artist driven by emotion, and through her music she allowed people to see her vulnerability. Songs like Slide Away, Midnight Sky, and later, Flowers, captured not just heartbreak, but growth. She didn't shy away from pain. She turned it into sound, art, and truth. Each lyric was a confession, but also a declaration that healing was possible. When she sang about loving herself, it didn't sound like arrogance. It sounded like survival. Her fans related to it because they had seen her evolve in real time, from a young Disney star to a woman who had faced the world, lost love, and still stood tall. Liam's journey was quieter, but no less powerful. Away from the headlines, he focused on his craft and his peace of mind. His film roles after 2020 reflected maturity and introspection, mirroring the calm that he had built in his personal life. In interviews, he avoided drama, never using pain as a tool for attention. There was a quiet strength in his silence, a message that you don't have to explain your healing to anyone. For many who had watched him go through one of the most public breakups of the decade, his resilience became a quiet inspiration. What connected both Miley and Liam after everything was a kind of emotional honesty. They didn't pretend their story had been perfect. They didn't erase each other from memory. Instead, they accepted it for what it was, a part of their history that shaped who they became. Miley once said that their relationship was real love, but it came at a time when they were still discovering who they were. That honesty struck a chord with millions who had followed their story. It reminded people that sometimes the right love happens at the wrong time. And that doesn't make it meaningless. Their relationship had been dissected by tabloids, romanticized by fans, and analyzed by critics. But beneath all of that, it was a story about two people growing up together under impossible pressure. From the last song to the Malibu fires, from the red carpets to the quiet separation, they had lived through experiences that would change anyone. Fame magnified every small detail, but what really mattered was how they chose to handle it. They didn't turn their breakup into a spectacle. They didn't tear each other down. They walked away with dignity, proving that even in Hollywood, respect can survive the end of a relationship. As time went on, people began to see their story not as gossip, but as growth. Miley's journey became an anthem for self-empowerment. Her lyrics spoke to anyone who had ever loved and lost, anyone who had needed to rebuild from the pieces of a shared life. Liam's quiet resilience showed that sometimes healing doesn't need to be loud, that peace can be just as powerful as passion. Together, they represented two sides of recovery, one expressive, one introspective, both genuine. Even years later, their names occasionally appear together in headlines, often as nostalgic reflections rather than breaking news. Fans still share clips of the last song, commenting on how young and in love they looked, as if watching the beginning of something timeless. But what makes their story enduring isn't the fact that it ended, it's the way it evolved. Their love didn't vanish. It simply changed form. It became something softer, wiser, and rooted in gratitude. Miley once said in an interview that closure doesn't come from forgetting someone. It comes from understanding why it had to end. That statement felt like the perfect summary of everything she and Liam had lived through. They didn't lose each other out of failure. They outgrew the version of themselves that existed together. And sometimes that's the most mature form of love, knowing when to let go. Liam continued to live by the same calm principles that had always defined him. He built a life grounded in simplicity, surrounded by family and close friends. His peace wasn't about isolation. It was about finding stability in a world that often demanded noise. For him, success wasn't measured in fame, but in contentment. For Miley, success was in expression, in using her voice to empower herself and others. Their paths were different, but both were moving toward fulfillment. In a world obsessed with happy endings, their story offered something far more real. A reminder that not all endings are failures. Some are transformations. Their relationship may not have lasted, but it left behind lessons about love, change, and the courage to evolve. It taught people that it's okay to love someone deeply and still choose to walk away. That growth doesn't always happen side by side. That sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do for each other is to set each other free. Today, when people look back on Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth, they don't just remember a breakup. They remember a journey, from youthful romance to adult resilience, from passion to peace. Their story became part of pop culture because it reflected something universal. Everyone has loved, lost, and learned. Everyone has looked back on a relationship and realized it changed them in ways they never expected. And maybe that's why their story still matters. It's not about the drama or the headlines, but about the humanity underneath it all. It's about two people who met when they were young, fell in love, made mistakes, tried again, and finally learned who they were. That's what makes it powerful. Not because it ended, but because it meant something. In the end, Miley found strength in her art, and Liam found peace in his silence. Their lives moved forward. Their worlds continued to turn, but somewhere within them, a part of that shared past still existed. Not as pain, but as a quiet reminder of where they had come from. They were two souls who crossed paths at the right time to teach each other something essential about love and life. So when people ask what really led to their breakup, the answer isn't scandal or betrayal. It's growth. It's evolution. It's life. Sometimes love isn't meant to be forever. It's meant to guide you to the person you're supposed to become. And in that sense, Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth's story didn't end in heartbreak. It ended in understanding.